Yo, I knew that panel would be awesome. What a great discussion. But I have somebody coming up who is going to be just as dynamic and powerful and really diving into a really important conversation that we need to be having within this room, specifically at this summit. Our next panel is going to be the digital financial literacy as a vehicle for economic inclusion. I cannot stress enough how important that is. I talk about digital literacy, but I don't add the financial piece too often on my shows, but I think now after listening to Nicole, I think I'm gonna have to add the financial in there. So without further ado, digital financial literacy as a vehicle for economic inclusion, where our speakers will examine the role of both private and public entities in effectively addressing and closing the digital financial gap. Please welcome the incredible, the dynamic Nicole Goodkind.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Thanks so much for joining this crucial panel on financial inclusion in the digital age. Right now, about 1.4 billion people worldwide remain unbanked. That's 1.4 billion people excluded from the global financial system. And this gap is more than just a missed opportunity for economic growth. It cuts off access to essential services, stifles entrepreneurship, and deepens inequality, especially in developing economies. As our world becomes increasingly digital, too many, particularly in emerging markets, still lack the financial tools needed to engage with the global economy. So today, I'm joined by an esteemed group of leaders to discuss how public and private sectors can bridge this gap by reaching vulnerable populations, improving digital literacy, and building financial resilience. So I'm honored to have with me here today Her Highness Sheikha Shamma bin Sultan bin Khalifa Al Nahyan. She's the president and CEO of the UAE Independent Climate Change Accelerators, and she brings a unique perspective on how climate action and financial inclusion intersect. Next to her, I'm honored to have Mr. Graham MacMillan. He's the president of the Visa Foundation, where he leads initiatives focused on inclusive economic growth, particularly through access to digital financial services. Thank you for joining us. And then I have Mr. Michael Piwowar. He's the Executive Vice President at the Milken Institute Finance and former Commissioner of the US SEC. He has a deep expertise in financial regulation and policy, particularly around the challenges of financial inclusion. And then last but certainly not least, I have Tarek Mouganie. He is the founder and group CEO of Affinity Africa, who is at the forefront of bringing financial services to underserved populations across Africa through innovative technological solutions. So thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start by just kind of going down the line. This is a question to all of you. You know, we're living in a time where your mobile phone can serve as your bank, it's your payment processor, often it's your business partner. Yet billions still don't have access to these tools. So from where you sit, figuratively, not literally on the stage, what's one thing that's stopping us from fully closing that gap? And should we be closing that gap? And we can begin with you.
So we need to fill that gap. It's basically we need organizations like the one that I'm currently running, the UAE's Independent Climate Change Accelerators, that sits between the public and the private sector to come up with innovative solutions to service the underserved. Because as we move to a green economy, we cannot afford to leave anyone behind.
Mr. MacMillan.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. The pace of change, the inevitability of digitization, I think is well documented. And I think the scale, the efficiency by which it's driving that change is really actually hard to fathom at times. I think every day we wake up and just see the headlines. I mean, obviously for Visa, we're facilitating payments, trillions of dollars of payments every year. So scale is in our DNA. But as the president of the foundation, we're particularly focused on the billion or so that are at risk of being left behind. I think for us, it's fundamentally anchored in how do we support the organizations, companies that are right there providing the products and services, meeting the needs of particular customers. But at the end of the day, you can provide the product and service, but if the trust isn't there, that it can deliver. You're not going to lose your identity or have money taken from you. That's the essence of success for us.
Mr. Piwowar?
Yeah, so in your introduction, you talked about the unbanked, right? And that's typically the word that we use in the United States, unbanked and underbanked. Traditionally, people have entered the financial system through their banks, but that's changing, as we just heard. So we have a lot of people in the U.S. who are skeptical of banks. They've just grown up in a community where they haven't had access to the banks, or recent immigrants who've maybe come from countries and don't have something like the equivalent of deposit insurance and those sorts of things. So the phone is the particular way to do it. It's amazing to me that countries like Kenya, for example, with M-Pesa, which is a mobile payment system. I was there about 8 years ago, and I saw a bunch of people, the poorest of the poor, walking around with the old Nokia brick phones, right? And it was fantastic. The ones that we recycled, and where do they end up? They end up there, and you can build mobile apps on systems where you can really bring people into the financial system on even the oldest of technology.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm going to answer the question in the context of Africa, which is where I'm from or where I operate. We are the youngest continent in the world, which is a huge opportunity for the rest of the world, but yet we seem to be left behind. And I think there are 3 reasons why. First is a cost element. Yes, we all have smartphones now. We've gone beyond feature phones. We have smartphones, but the cost of data is super expensive. So it is an entire ecosystem that needs to be enabling for financial inclusion. The second is literacy. So not just being technologically literate, but also financially literate as well too. And then the third is poor product design. I know there's an example of mobile money that we talk about often. It's a very limited product. We've seen protests in Kenya, in Nigeria, and Ghana as well too, of the high cost basically of payments companies like M-Pesa. So things need to evolve and move on from there.
Yeah, and I certainly want to discuss how they should evolve and where you see that going. But I want to go back to you, Your Highness. Most people don't automatically think of climate change when they hear financial inclusion. So I'm wondering how these 2 global challenges intersect and why it's so crucial to address the 2 of them together.
So addressing climate change is a necessity, and so is transitioning to a green economy. And at the core concept of a green economy is inclusivity. And so I remember when I studied in business school, today's economic model is based on extracting as much as we can, and things go to waste, which exacerbates inequalities. And we need to move to this new model where we embrace collaboration, circularity, we embrace the sharing economy. Yes.
And I want to encourage all of my panelists to jump in at any time, regardless of who I address these questions to. But Mr. MacMillan, we've seen how vulnerable communities are hit hardest during economic crises like inflation or the COVID-19 pandemic. How can these digital financial services be designed to act as a safety net for people when the next crisis, unfortunately, inevitably hits?
Well, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. First, you have to have design and purpose of design put at the center. One of the approaches that we take at the foundation as both a grant maker, right, so we facilitate grant making to community-based and nonprofit organizations around the world, but we're also an investor. So we have a corpus of assets that we are able to invest via intermediaries and investment intermediaries that in turn support small micro businesses, which is really the thrust of what our women-led small micro businesses, which is really what our focus is. And what's very clear to us, 2 things. One, it's fundamentally understanding that when you're an entrepreneur, you're solving for a market failure, and it's a product market fit. And if you're a woman-led business, you're solving and you have an intentionality to serve that particular market. You understand that customer very well, and you're going to design a product and service to meet that need. For us, we see this as a huge market opportunity to drive growth and in turn inclusion. So what we're doing is investing into funds and other partners that see those business opportunities where they understand that that product market fit is inherent in what they're trying to design for. The exciting part is that it's done at scale. It's not dependent upon philanthropy to get to that scale, to work with other partners. It's truly an investment that's meant to generate a financial return that's attractive, bringing in other investors, and ultimately to be able to partner with other platforms and others that meet the specific needs, but also are attractive from a market performance standpoint.
Mr. Mouganie, you're on the ground in Africa seeing this. I mean, what's your take on that? Do you think that this is working well?
I completely agree, and it makes economic sense to actually do this stuff as well too. So when we started building our product, we are the first full-fledged digital bank on the continent. We got our banking license in Ghana 2 years ago, the first in 13 years. We've spent the last 4.5 years building our product, and thanks to grant providers and thanks to some amazing investors as well too. And one of the things that we wanted to focus on was trying to understand women in the informal sector, not because it's something wonderful to do, it is, but it makes economic sense. And what we thought is if we solved for them, we would solve for all of the other use cases. And what we decided to do is actually build something that's holistic. So by getting a banking license, we focus on 3 cost levers that we can manage. Our cost of funding, so we don't have any FX risk. We borrow local retail deposits. Cost of operations, we're digital. It's practically free, basically. And then third thing is cost of risk, managing it by basically understanding our customers properly and not doing untowards kind of data collection mechanisms that a lot of digital lenders do. As a result of that, we were the first banking license, as I said, in 12 years, but as a result of that, we built products that are free. We're the only bank account in Ghana where all our products are free and gain interest, and on top of that, we're the cheapest digital lender. And what we can see from what we're doing, which is reinventing banking basically for the global south, the global majority, is our products have enabled our small businesses that we support to grow their revenue by 500%. We launched in January, by the way. We have grown their employment base by 350%. And in Ghana, in the last 8.5 months, we've created 90,000 jobs on the ground just by building a bank for the people.
Wow.
That's amazing. Can I just there's a lot of amazing stuff going on in Africa right now, particularly on financial technology, fintech solutions. So we, at the Milken Institute, we do a conference every year in Abu Dhabi with Her Highness. It's a Middle East and Africa Summit. In our fintech sessions, we talk about digital financial literacy and those types of issues. And the panels mostly talked about what was going on in the Middle East. Africa was sort of an afterthought. This was 5 years ago. The last 2 years, the amount of just amazing things that are going on, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, is just off the charts. And a lot of the investment from the Middle East is going that direction. So I think in the next few years, we're going to see a lot.
Thank you. And I just want to emphasize one point as well, too. I mean, technology, and there are tons of my colleagues here in the audience who would attest it as well, too. Technology has been such a big driver in our continent. But historically, the big focus around financial inclusion has been around access. I think we need to have a conversation about taking it a step further into affordability, which is super important.
But we've seen some very interesting businesses working in Africa. So there's Ignite Power that has a pay-as-you-go model where over 200,000 people have benefited from electricity, solar electricity, internet, and solar irrigation as well. So yeah, these new models are giving access to people at the bottom of the pyramid.
I love it. The whole panel is African now.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to pivot away from Africa, but this is also access to these digital tools also affects us here in the U.S. as well, and we saw that during the pandemic when we saw this large shift towards digital payments out of what was a necessity. Mr. Piwowar and maybe Mr. MacMillan, you can help with this as well. I'm curious about what permanent changes this brought about and how we ensure that those changes actually benefit the everyday consumer, not just kind of larger financial institutions or tech institutions.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we're very concerned about at the Milken Institute. So, during the pandemic, one of the government programs was the Paycheck Protection Program, where banks could apply to the Small Business Administration for small companies, small businesses, that sort of stuff. What we saw very early on in the pandemic, it was the large banks taking care of their large customers first. And the reason why the smaller banks were not becoming part, they just simply did not have the technology to hook up to the Small Business Administration. And there were some companies out there that actually then provided tech support for some of these smaller banks to be able to do that. And then we also worked with the Treasury Department to have a timeout period solely for those smaller institutions because they were the ones that were serving the communities that were hit hardest economically and from the health effects of the pandemic.
Yeah. And were there lessons learned from this that then kind of radiated out into other countries or continents that you saw? No?
So on the point raised, yes, definitely. I have a nexus as well to the UK as well too. So I spent my time between London and Accra, and these things are very important, not just in the global south, but also in the global north. In the UK in particular, especially with everything that's happened since the pandemic, since obviously the rise in interest rates as well too, there's been a huge emphasis around financial literacy. And I know that a lot of my kind of peers, and I would consider all of us in the UK privileged, were reaching out to me for financial advice in terms of how to manage inflation and how to deal with everything that they were going through.
Well, I was going to say, at the end of the day, finance going forward is just going to be ones and zeros. There's the famous Economist cover with basically these oil rigs that were the big internet companies. I don't necessarily need to name them. They're pretty obvious who they would be. And it's the ones and zeros. And so calling it financial literacy or digital literacy, I think they're synonymous and one and the same. They're on-ramps to basically inclusion and access, but it's also how you design them so that it leads to better behaviors and better outcomes. I mean, just getting access, even if that's affordable, it's important. Those are primary steps. The presumption is that it leads to the accumulation of assets, right? That you have an ability to protect yourself financially. That, you know, with the the acceleration, of climate change, that you have some resiliency built in. Those are the outcomes that we're ultimately hoping to drive, recognizing that the on-ramps are fundamental. But none of that's going to work if there's no trust in the system.
That's a great point.
And that's the thing that I don't know that we've solved for. We're losing trust among ourselves. How are you going to trust a platform that is built on ones and zeros? That, to me, is the real unlock.
Yeah, so I don't think we're going to solve that here, but we can try. It seems
We've got
like
a few minutes. We can.
Yeah, we got 6 minutes here.
The question of trust is so important because we noticed this as well too. You know, there was a whole crisis that happened in Ghana, Nigeria, and other countries as well too, where 90% of financial institutions were shut down in the last decade. And so when we got the first banking license, everyone looked at us skeptically. They couldn't understand, number one, you know, like, who are you? And is our money safe with you? Because obviously if anything happened to them, they're at higher risk than the rest of the population. And then the second thing as well too is, in our case, which was quite funny, is they didn't understand why we were free. What was the catch? You know, is this a trap? And what we noticed from a behavior point of view as we started adjusting, so obviously we use AI and we use a lot of technology as well to build our product, but what we're noticing is they would give us a small amount of money, hold it for a month, withdraw all their money and test it out a couple times and then build. We now have an average account balance that's 3 times larger than the average bank account in Ghana in just 8.5 months. And 55% of our customers have downloaded their first ever app in their life.
3 times is the key. You
it
just
is
have to
the key,
keep going.
exactly, and growing. But it is design is so important. I know that word has been used a couple times.
Yeah, and Your Highness, it looks like you want to jump in.
Yes, I do. Tarek mentioned, so the initial focus was women, and women are disproportionately affected by climate change. So 80% of women are climate migrants. They work in agriculture, and therefore they are at the forefront of climate change. And so I really appreciate that your focus was women, and I think we need to do more for women in terms of allowing them to have access to bank accounts and giving them the tools they need to survive.
So 62% of our client base are women.
Wow.
Over 50% of our business are actually women as well too, including our agents, and our board chair is a woman, and the majority of board members are women as well too. So thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Amazing. Mr. Piwowar, did you want to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things I was going to point out was that, right, that with digital finance is truly global. Unfortunately, so is financial fraud, is also global, right? And we see that, you know, particularly young people, where are they getting their financial literacy, where are they getting their financial education? Most of them are getting it from social media, TikTok. Also financial fraud, you know, things like Ponzi schemes spread through social media and stuff. And the regulators have been behind the curve, right? They typically say, well, how do we reach people and educate them about financial literacy and those types of issues? Well, we'll put it on our website. Well, nobody goes to websites anymore. So they're actually, well, if you can't beat them, let's join them. And so they're actually embracing social media, and I think that's the more creative, more effective way to get people educated and to build more trust into the system.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to end on a high note, and this is for all of you. So if you had to bet on one game-changing innovation or policy that could truly close this digital financial gap in the next decade, so I'm asking a lot of you here, what would it be, and why is it a potential game changer? And whoever wants to go first can.
Artificial intelligence in the use in financial services is tremendous, right? So I see a lot of promise in using that to provide financial advice, right? So the cost of providing financial advice is quite high, but it's actually going down. And so companies can scale that type of advice and do portfolio optimization and all kinds of other things. And I think the ability to use that and scale and bring these costs down so that smaller account sizes can be profitable for firms to take on is going to be a game changer.
Of course, it would also come with a lot of necessary regulation, I'm sure, and oversight there. Millen?
I was just going to say a combination of what you were building on, but it's where biometric capabilities combined with sort of bespoke product design that is low cost. What you need, anticipation of what you want, but it's for you and you are identified as who you are and how you transact is safe and secure.
Ines?
For me, it's I'd like to see countries be able to accelerate regulation that will support green economy businesses.
Mr. Mouganie?
I was going to say technology and AI as well too, but luckily it's been covered. And I think for us in our part of the world, actually it's not tech, it's policy. Because when we got our banking license, we couldn't exist as a business until regulation changed in Ghana. So having people like people on this panel who have dealt with policy, who are conveners basically of people of power, that's so important because we'll be left behind otherwise.
And one more question, Mr. Mouganie and Your Highness. I know that you have boots on the ground at universities here, and I'm sure the two of you are also often frequently asked to lecture and speak to young people today. What makes you confident about the next generation and how they're going to continue to solve these problems?
I think young people want to see change and want to be part of driving the SDGs forward, and so they want to join organizations that are doing the right thing. So that gives me hope.
It's good to know.
The relentless belief that there's just a better way of doing things. They don't know what they don't know, and that's the best thing that's out there.
Yeah, and they've grown up in the technology. It's just ubiquitous for them, and so the ability to change and do great things is just amazing.
I think things have changed so much in the last 25 years since I graduated, and given where the world is at and how things have changed, where it's actually okay to actually work at a startup when you leave university and not have to do investment banking or management consulting, I think I have a lot of hope for the younger generation because of the opportunities that they have.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists here today and also all of you for joining us. This is just the beginning of a very long and broad conversation, and I encourage you to come up to us and talk to us about it and continue it in the other rooms and halls that we have here today. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you guys. Thank you.